Welcome to the Growth, Grace, and Prosperity Podcast. Join Stewart Heath for down-to-earth conversations with top professionals, entrepreneurs, and leaders who have a story to tell. Let's get rolling.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining another episode of the Growth, Grace, and Prosperity Podcast. We're very blessed to have as our guest today, Kriste Goad, has had a very successful career in marketing. I'm excited to hear more about her story and for her to share that story with you. Kriste, thank you so much for taking time out to join us.
You're welcome, Stewart. Thanks for inviting me.
Very excited to get into this. Kriste, when you think back on your career, and I always joke, I'm always interviewing people of a certain generation. I won't say age, but people who've had enough experience to have learned a thing or two, or to have some ups and downs, and that's important to me as I see the world right now. But when you think back on your career, what was the biggest game changer for you that sort of led you to where you are now?
It's a great question. I would say that when I think back on it, the biggest game changers, there's been multiples of them, have always been when I took on a role or a job that was way outside of my comfort zone. You know, I had never done it before, which is kind of like every job I've ever had.
Yeah.
And it's just those, it's like, hey, I've never done this before, but this looks interesting. This looks like something I would really want to do, and I think I can do it.
So your game changers is that fair to say, call it stepping up to the challenge? Is that
stepping up to the challenge? Yeah. I mean, like I started my career, I was a journalism major. I started my career as a newspaper reporter. So that tells you how long ago that was.
Yeah. Don't tell me it was for the Nashville Banner. So,
it was, yeah. And, afternoon newspaper.
That's right. Yeah.
It's been so long that died and has been resurrected.
Yes. Yeah.
But
I actually still have a coffee mug from the original Banner. They were a client of mine in another iteration of my career.
Oh, well, listen, it was so fun. I loved every minute of that job. And of course, that was right out of college. So I'd never been a newspaper reporter except for when I worked on the staff of the Auburn Plainsman in Auburn.
Did you really?
I did, which was fun also. But then, I ended up getting out of journalism and I went on to a former fellow journalist had moved on and was the press secretary for the governor. And I needed a job. I was
governor of
Tennessee. And they needed a new speechwriter. And I said, okay, well, I haven't really written speeches except for like high school, maybe. But great. And they hired me and I took on that job. And then that led to, governors are term limited. So
which governor?
Well, I say it was the most popular governor, Don Sundquist. He was actually at one point Tennessee's most popular governor. Yeah.
Didn't end that way.
His second term, didn't quite end that way. But yeah, he was a great guy. That was so much fun. That was a huge challenge. And so from there, that really got me into the industry that I'm in now, which is healthcare. And so I got hired to be the first internal corporate communications director for a company here in Nashville at the time called Healthways, and it was publicly traded.
Yeah.
So that was a whole new ball game. But that's where I got really deep into healthcare, B2B, and, it's a very complex industry. And so from there, again, loved that job, loved that place, great people, learned so much. And then from there, I went to work for agencies. So that's a whole different ball game. You got to bill your time. You got to think about things. Right. You got to juggle multiple clients. You got to juggle your own time, eat what you kill kind of thing. So then fast forward, I worked for a couple agencies and then I'll talk about this in a minute, but my last agency, I left there and that was sort of, a fork in the road. And I decided to start my own business, my own agency. Initially just as an independent contractor. But then it just grew, based on the relationships and, credibility, I guess, that I had developed through the years. And, then that became a full-on agency and employees and me being an entrepreneur. And that was never anything I set out to be. But that is how I arrived here today, as the owner of my own healthcare B2B agency. And so that's what I've been doing for the past 7 years, I guess. Is crazy. Can't believe it's been
You beat the curve. Most new businesses don't last 2 years. So,
well, that's what people keep telling me. I hope they're right.
But you've already alluded to it. I always ask about bumps in the road. So it's a little bit different than the game changers risk, because the bumps in the road, I guess the indication is it might be a little painful of a game changer or something you didn't expect or see coming. And we all have these things. Can you share a bump and how you got through it and what you were expecting and what you ended up with on the other side of the bump?
So many bumps in the road.
Yes. Yeah.
But I mean, what I can say for sure is it's those bumps in the roads that really force you to grow the most.
Yep. Absolutely.
So there's been plenty of times when things did not pan out the way that I would have liked, or the way that I hoped, or the way I had expected. But one in particular that I will share it was my job with my last agency prior to starting my own agency. And you've heard me say, at the top of the podcast, that my other jobs, I love them, right? Love the people, love the work, I tend to kind of jump all in, drink the Kool-Aid kind of a person. And that was the case with my last agency, and I loved it. I loved the people. I loved the work. I grew so much. I had so many opportunities. And that was one of those where, when I started with that agency, I came in and I was on client service side, but then there was an opportunity for the chief marketing officer position. And, my boss at the time, he was the owner, and he showed me this org chart, and there was this role for a chief marketing officer. I was like, what is that? He's like, oh, yeah, was that something you'd be interested in? I'm like, yeah, I would love to do that. Well, I didn't know anything about what it took to be a chief marketing officer, or marketing for that matter. I had come out of the PR media relations world. So, but I dove in, and it turns out, I really love marketing, and I also love sales. So I was doing a lot of sales, and I didn't know what that meant, but I was kind of like just a natural networker, and so naturally sort of good at working relationships and building new relationships and opening doors. And so anyway, then that agency was acquired. And in the first, year of that transition, I was on the executive team. And it just became clear that the agency owner, had a different idea and a different direction, and it didn't include me, kind of going forward on that growth trajectory. So I was fired. I tell people the way I started my own business is I was fired.
More common than most people realize.
Yeah. So I was like, oh man.
And that's a bump. That's a bump in the road.
That's a huge bump. And I was, like I said, I was so invested, and, really, it was really devastating, just kind of the way it all went down for me, and painful. Talk about there was just a lot of, emotion tied up into it, and fear, what am I going to do next? And at that point I was older, and I, for the first time in my life, thought, oh, wait a minute, I might not be able to get hired into certain roles because of my age. I wasn't 50 yet, but I was knocking on the door. And that was a wild realization at that point, right? As a woman, an older woman, kind of like back in the job hunt. And I was either overqualified for positions or underqualified, or, it's just the reality of today is that you may be completely qualified, but never get that first conversation. So I kind of like played around in that arena a little bit, trying to figure out what is it I want to do. And, I interviewed with some other companies, and I had some equity in the previous agency, so I had a non-compete. So that meant more now then than it does now, I guess. But I couldn't compete with like a competing. I couldn't work for a competing agency unless I owned it. So I just thought at that point, you know what? Hey, I've helped a lot of other companies grow, and financially, I was in a good enough position that I was able to kind of take a bet on myself. And so that's what I did. And that bump in the road turned into the kick in the ass, I guess maybe that led me to where I am today, which is another place that I just love. I love entrepreneurship. I love building and growing something of my own. And, that comes with its own bumps in the road. But then they're all mine, all my mistakes. And, I'm ultimately, responsible and to blame when things don't go right. So.
Right. Are you still active in politics and staying involved in those circles?
No, Stewart.
When you left the governor's office, you just, you left that world?
I left that world. I still have really great relationships. And there's a group of us that worked in the governor's press office, and that we still get together, quite a lot and talk politics. But no, I didn't stay involved in politics. I follow it closely, except for now. It's just so disheartening to watch, and it kind of hurts my heart in so many ways that I'm just not that. I vote every single chance I get, and I'm happy to talk about what I believe in, but I'm not actively engaged in politics. Yeah.
So I'm not saying your story is common, because every story is unique, but it's not unusual for entrepreneurs to start their companies out of basically getting fired. It's not unusual. In my own case, I quit a perfectly good job where they liked me and wanted to promote me, and I'm like, no, I can do better myself. And they probably didn't realize how wrong I was for 10 years later.
You really don't. I mean, that was the interesting part. Like, I was like, oh yeah, I know what's involved. I've been on the executive team, and I've sat in the executive circles, and you just don't,
No, you don't.
No idea.
And if you did, most people would never do it, but, and that's okay. Entrepreneurs will do what they're going to do. That is
a true story.
Sort of their nature. I'm fascinated by your company name and the title that you give yourself, Founder and Chief Firestarter. But talk about that name. And I'm not even. Say that again.
Fuoco.
Okay.
Or Fuoco, because it's Italian for fire.
Okay.
And I have Italian ancestors on my mom's side, and I love all things Italian.
I love that.
Yeah. I know. And so I was looking for a name for my company when I first went out. And it's just a random story. I had a dream one night, and I was sharing with a friend of mine. I'm like, oh, I had this dream about this. It was like this RV, and it had, oh gosh, it wasn't Fuoco. It was, I think it was just like Fireball or something. I don't know. I can't believe I'm blanking on exactly what was in the dream, but they're like, oh, maybe that's what you should name your company. And I'm like, I don't think so. And they're like, well, wonder what that word is in other languages. And so I started looking it up. Firebird. Sorry, that's what it was. Firebird, on the side of this RV. And I mean, I don't know. So when I looked it up, I saw Fuoco was fire in Italian. And that kind of struck me. And then I liked how it was spelled because I was sort of mad at the world a little bit, when I first started. Excuse me. So I was kind of like, oh, it's like Fuoco.
Yeah. How appropriate. Yeah.
I thought it was funny. And I'm like, oh, this works. This works.
Yes.
And I just kind of liked, there's a story behind it. And
Sure. Yeah.
And I looked up the etymology of it was, Fuoco was originally the name, for how so many of us get our last names. Historically, it's like, oh,
Sure.
You got your last name for what you do for a living.
Sure.
And so it was the name for people that back in the day, they lit the fires and kept them going. And that was people's fuel sources, And so, I was like, oh, that's kind of apropos for, marketing, PR world. And then I came up with Chief Fire Starter and I liked that. And I've just been running with that ever since.
I love it. I absolutely love it.
Thank you.
All right, let's pivot to something a little bit more practical. I always like to ask entrepreneurs, how do you stay current? How do you learn new things? What's the discipline behind that? And I've yet to talk to one yet that hasn't told me that they love learning. And because I think that's probably true of almost every entrepreneur. They are lifelong learners, as many successful people are. But how they do it and go about it and stay current is very different. So tell us about your habits and disciplines and even sources that you might go to stay current on various things.
Sure. Yeah, I don't look at my staying current on things as a discipline at all. I am just a lifelong learner, like insatiably curious. I think on the Colby test, it's like a personality test. Way back when I very first took that, it basically said that I was one of those people that I just gathered information. Oftentimes I don't know when to stop when I have enough. That doesn't hold true for me anymore. I think, as you get along in your career and as an entrepreneur, having to make decisions, I don't need as much information. But in terms of learning and growing, I'm constantly reading. I read all kinds of newsletters and news sources every single day, both within like the healthcare industry that I'm in, but also in the, marketing, PR, media relations industry, trying to stay current on the latest trends and things. And obviously AI and ChatGPT are huge across the board for everyone. So that's a big one. Like this past year, like I think a lot of people, maybe not everyone, maybe not most people, but a lot of people and a lot of people I know, just kind of been playing around with it and trial and error. That's a great way to learn. I learn by doing. So, and I think probably most people do, or, I don't know, but that's certainly been true of my career, on the job learning and training.
Right.
And then I also, just try to stay involved in groups that help, that I can experience, share with, as well as learn from other people. I'm in a group called EO Nashville, and it's part of the Global Entrepreneurs Organization. So that's been really great as a place to, just learn and grow as a business owner, and learn from other people, as well as they have a lot of programs that they offer, whether it's a executive for a day at Belmont University, or it's online webinars with Simon Sinek. They offer all kinds of educational opportunities that I really try to take advantage of as part of that program. So I would say those are my biggest ways of tackling and learning new things.
Do you have a favorite business book?
Well, I'm just looking over. I've got a whole stack of business books.
I see 10X on the table.
Well, I was about to mention that one because
is that Grant Cardone's? That is.
So this is Dan Sullivan and
Dan Sullivan,
Benjamin Hardy, but it's sort of tied to, EOS. And we are an EOS company, and, I've worked with an implementer and all of that. So all of, like, Traction has been a very influential business book for me. Definitely. And there's a lot of books that come with EOS, that are really influential. I think The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team is a good one.
Love that one myself. Yeah.
Yeah. But this 10X is easier than 2X. That's been one that I've really been fascinated with this past year. And that's a good book. And the whole premise there is to grow 10 times. It's almost easier than 2 times. Because it forces you to focus.
Yeah.
And what would have to happen and what would you have to do to grow 10X than just to maybe just grow as you've always grown, and maybe that's a good way to do it. And maybe there's things you shouldn't be doing. So
I was at a conference last month that had a guest speaker. I think his name is Dan Werner, if I'm not mistaken. But he's the author of Building an Elite Organization. And he spoke a couple of times. And I've actually read that book, but he was far more impressive than the book was. And it made me put it back on my list to read again, because what he's done, and he comes out of the financial world, in I think the home mortgage business, and it sort of takes traction and takes it to the next level. It was fascinating. It was fascinating. So you might enjoy that one. So if you haven't looked at that one.
Another one that came up that I just came up with for me this week during one of my EO small group meetings was a book called Uncertain. And apparently there's a lot of uncertain. I think it's uncertain. She was going to share it, but apparently a lot of, entrepreneurs live with a lot of uncertainty. So I'm excited to crack that book too.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one, but it makes a lot of sense. One of my favorite things about entrepreneurs, this came from Visual Capitalist, which is an email I get every day, and they take whatever data struck them, and then they visualize it, and they put entrepreneurs on a chart as compared to the general population, and the entrepreneurs that have ADD are like 5x the time, 5x to the normal population. So we're all constant multitaskers. I don't like to call it ADD, but we're just really good multitaskers, and that's generally thought to be a mental illness. So and so okay, and we're all like that, and the uncertainty is, you just sort of get used to it.
Yeah, get really comfortable with the discomfort of it all,
and to the point where I get worried when everything seems to be going okay.
Like, what's going on? Is something wrong here?
Y'all aren't doing something right.
I mean, that is a mental illness right there. I've been experiencing that this year as well. And I'm like, or you need to just calm down. You need to enjoy this. Yeah. It's good when there's some chaos. Yeah.
Let's pivot. Let's talk about personal finance, and again, no numbers. We're not asking for bank account numbers or anything. As a successful entrepreneur, usually there ends up being investable cash. And if you don't mind, share the asset classes that you invest in personally.
Sure. Well, asset classes. So, I mean, obviously I have like 401k.
Is that in index funds or individual stocks, or
I would say it's more majority index funds.
Yes.
Is what I would say there. And I have a commercial real estate investment Obviously my own home, my business. Let's see, what other investments? Do you count like, HSAs and all those kinds of things? I'm probably
Not really, unless you got
mildly
dollars in your HFA. So yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't know if you had an active brokerage portfolio and you're doing stocks and bonds and stuff like, or as we were talking about before, are you doing crypto? Are you doing art? Do you have a stamp collection that's, almost anything can be an investment, but for most entrepreneurs, it's their company.
Yeah.
But it's some diversify, which I think we all should. So.
Yes. Art. I don't know what classifies as an art investment. I have a few pieces that I've invested in, but it's nothing like, I would imagine these multi-millionaire, billionaire folks.
Yeah. Is it hanging on your wall at home or is it in a vault?
Oh, it's hanging on my wall. If I'm going to invest, so I'm not an art investor. No.
Right.
Just like art, and I'll put it on my wall.
Yeah.
That's not very exciting. I've got, like an annuity that I've had for 1 million years since my son was born. He's now 23. I might be fairly boring, Stewart.
That's okay. That's okay. At Harvard Grace, boring is beautiful is actually our motto. But
a little bit of cash,
I find that most people want a lot of excitement in their investment portfolio. It's not usually a good sign. But
I did invest in my commercial real estate investment. I was made aware of this thing called the opportunity zones back a few years ago, and so I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. And I did have a capital, opportunity to invest that in an opportunity zone. So, I did a lot of research and learned as much as I could about that. And so that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I suspect you'll do quite well with that. And if you hold it the requisite amount of time, you won't pay any capital gains someday when you do sell it. So, there's lots of advantages.
Crossed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's great. All right. Well, we're coming to the end of our time here. This is my favorite question. Kriste, if you're mentoring someone or somebody just really wants to follow in your footsteps, what have you learned over your career, which is the one piece of advice that you would give someone?
Well, I would say stay curious, be yourself, trust your instincts, be open to opportunities, and be willing to change.
Willing to change. I love that.
That's more than one nugget, but
it's okay. That's okay. Everybody gets a bonus from this episode. So that's great. Thank you so much. As I like to say, anybody with a C-level title in their name has no time, so we appreciate you sharing yours with us. If anybody should want to get in touch with you after watching this episode, how would they do that?
Well, they could feel free to email me. My email is kg@growwithfuoco.com. It's FUOCO, growwithfuoco.com.
We will make sure that is in the show notes for anybody who's wanting to reach out and get in touch with you, make it easy for you. Again, thank you so much for sharing of your time.
Thank you.
Nuggets of wisdom you have shared with us. And maybe we can do it again in the future. And for the audience, thanks for watching this episode of the Growth, Grace, and Prosperity podcast. And hope that you will come back and join us for the next one. Y'all take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the Growth, Grace, and Prosperity podcast. If you'd like to be a guest, visit growthgraceprosperity.com/guest. We'd love to hear your story.